Well, good afternoon. This is a series of videos, one of a series of videos produced by the Cities Association of Santa Clara County of interest to our member cities. I'm Rod Sinks, a past president, and today we're joined by Jessica Vollmer of Working Partnerships USA. She's here to talk to us about the Schools and Communities First initiative that's just appeared on the ballot. Jessica, can you tell us, give us the story on how this got to the ballot?
Absolutely. So we've been, there's a number of organizations across California that have been working on an initiative similar to this for many years. We just qualified this initiative last Friday, the Friday before last, after an effort of community organizations, faith organizations, seniors and parents, students and labor groups, and just a massive coalition of organizations across California collecting 1.7 million signatures, the largest number of signatures ever submitted for an initiative in the state's history. And so we are thrilled that that hard work paid off and that we will now be on the ballot in November.
Wonderful. I know you have some slides to share with us, so let's get to that.
I do. So Rod, as you mentioned, I'm here to talk about the Schools and Communities First initiative. And I would like to start with why the Schools and Communities First initiative. Why do we think that this is something that our state needs now? So, you know, this is an initiative that is responding to the last 40 years of a lack of public of resources for our public services, our K-12 schools and our community college districts. For over 40 years now, some owners of large commercial properties have used a loophole to avoid paying their fair share in property taxes, which, as we know, go to fund our cities, our special jurisdictions, all the services that residents of our counties rely on in order to live here, in addition to our K-12 schools and our community college districts. And as I know all of us that live here have felt, and I know that the folks in the Cities Association have also felt and deal with every year, especially around this time of year, we have seen those public services cut because we don't have that funding because some folks are not paying their fair share in property taxes. Go ahead.
What I've heard about that from the superintendent of our high school district is she had a slide once that showed that about 1/3 of large commercial property owners were paying about 2/3 of property taxes. And sometime in the decades since, that burden shifted so that 2/3 are now borne by homeowners. So I'm interested in your thoughts about why that is.
Absolutely. We are seeing that homeowners are really footing the majority of the bill for the services that all of us rely on, and frankly, that our commercial property owners rely on as well. You know, for their employees to be able to live here. There are a number of factors, right? But a major one being that as we see homes are bought and sold constantly in California, folks want to move here. There's a huge housing market here, while at the same time, the biggest commercial property owners that have been, in operation for 70 years, those properties are not sold. Additionally, there are loopholes where, the reassessment for a property that is changing ownership, that change in ownership, fair market value reassessment is triggered when there will be an owner of that property who owns 50% or more of that property. And we know that there are ways around that if you have the means to create a multiple owner situation, which most of our folks that are just buying and selling residential homes don't have access to. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that we've seen that inequity in how our public services are funded right now.
I know that in the tech companies I've been a part of, we would completely modify the interior of the buildings. They were called leaseholder improvements. We were effectively in control of the building in all but name only, and the title was held by some entity that in fact was still on the tax rolls from long before. So
Absolutely.
I understand. Well, let's continue.
Absolutely. You know, and we're seeing, we've had these 40+ years of just not having enough funding for these services. We've seen services cut, and we're now in a moment where, as the members well know, and are wrestling with these very tough decisions right now, we're in a moment where our local governments have had to respond to an unprecedented, historic public health crisis that has decimated in some cases these budgets to provide these services because of the response that has been needed, because of the massive impact that this public health crisis has had on our economy and our residents. And so, we really feel this is an opportunity in November to reclaim $12 billion statewide annually for our local community, our local public resources, and our K-12 schools and community college districts. And we really do see this as a critical step on our path to recovering from the impacts of the pandemic.
Yeah, let's keep going.
So what will this initiative do? Schools and Communities First, again, it will reclaim $12 billion per year for our local governments, the services that are provided by local governments, K-12 schools and community colleges, by closing those commercial property tax loopholes. It protects all homeowners and renters by maintaining the Prop 13 protections for homeowners and all residential property and agricultural property. That money is then invested in our education system and our public government general funds. It provides one of the largest tax incentives in a generation to spur new investment in small businesses, levels the playing field for all of the businesses we have in our state that currently are paying property taxes on fair market value of their property, and ensures accountability so that money goes directly to our students and our communities. And I want to get into that a little bit about, so this is Schools and Communities First is a reform on Proposition 13. What we are saying in this initiative is that homeowners, residential property, and agricultural property should have Proposition 13 protections. And therefore, those properties are all excluded from this initiative. However, there are some commercial and industrial properties that, if they are worth over a certain amount, should not have the same protections in their prop tax and their property taxes as a homeowner or a senior who is on a fixed income and paying rent in San Jose. And so what we did with this initiative is we're looking at commercial and industrial properties that are worth over $3 million would be reassessed on a regular basis to fair market value, and that is the value that they would pay their property taxes on. As long as that property is not used for residential purposes. If it is a mixed use property and it's worth over $3 million, but 75% of that property is used for residential, that property will be excluded as well. So there are a significant number of exemptions for which commercial and industrial properties would actually see a reassessment in their property value, triggered by the Schools and Communities First initiative. And so I want to dive even more deeply into what this initiative will do for businesses. So as I mentioned, the trigger for reassessment is if a property is worth over $3 million and less than 75% of it is used for residential. which excludes already 88% of all of our businesses in our state. So what we're looking at is 88% of the businesses in California are worth $3 million or less, in which case they are automatically exempted from this. When we talk about that $12 billion statewide new revenue source, 80% of that $12 billion will come from just 6% of the commercial and industrial properties in our state that are valued at over $5 million. The other way that this is leveling the playing field for businesses in our state, it's closing that anti-competitive loophole. So if you're a new business and you just started in 2019 and you bought your property in 2019, you're paying your property taxes based on the 2019 value of your property. If your biggest competitor happens to have purchased their property 10 years ago, you're already at a disadvantage because they're paying property taxes on a lower on a property that has been assessed at 2009 fair market value. This also maintains California's low tax rates, which support our businesses here. So the tax rates will not change. And then the last thing that it does, or one of the other things that it does, is that it provides a tax break by eliminating, businesses will be able to, so there's a personal property tax for any equipment that is used at a small business. So if you run a print shop or you run a dry cleaners, all of the equipment that you use to operate your business is considered property and is taxed. This will allow businesses to write off up to $500,000 of that personal property tax, which is essentially a $500,000 tax break for a huge number. About 90% of the businesses in our state will benefit from that tax incentive. And again, just want to be very, very clear that this reform does nothing to how homeowners, residential property owners, and agricultural property owners pay their property taxes. Everything about those properties would stay the same. So where does this money go? In every county of this new revenue, 40% of that revenue generated will be peeled off and put into a special fund at the state level that is dedicated to our education system. So K through 12 schools and our community college districts. This is a fund that can't be borrowed against by the legislature. It cannot replace any current funding. It can only be supplemental. And that money will be redistributed to school districts across the state based on the local control funding formula. The remaining 60% of that revenue will stay in our local communities and be distributed across our county, city, and special district general funds, the way that our property taxes are currently distributed. So after that 40% is peeled away to the state fund, to that education fund, and the 60% remaining is divided, this is how much we project that the general funds of each of these cities will increase annually. And something important to note here is that these are property taxes. So with an assumption that the property values in our cities and our state continue to rise, these numbers will also continue to rise. So this is really a starting off point.
Wow, let me hold, wait a minute. You're talking to me about big monies coming to each of our cities as a result of this initiative. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. Yes.
This is, I think everybody ought to stop and take note. Find your city, all of you on the Cities Association board, and see what this would mean on an annual basis to revenue you have. I asked the mayor of Sunnyvale, our president, the other day, what he could do with $22.6 additional million, and he had a long list. I'm sure that you do too. Well, Jessica, this is really, really interesting. Let me ask you another couple questions about this then. How much money does the county get? We're all impacted by, you know, services that the county provides to the least of us. How much more will they have for their general fund?
The county's general fund would increase by about $256 million annually.
Wow, that's huge. And I see other districts that are funded by property tax also would receive substantially funding, right?
They would.
Mhm.
We have an, it's actually, I would have to stop sharing my screen to get back to that data
No,
source.
that's okay. That's okay. But I note that I happen to be the chair of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District this year. And we have all kinds of unfunded mandates from the state to mitigate climate change, programs that do that, all kinds of things that the state won't fund or is constrained to fund. So as a district that receives property tax, it'll mean a lot for us too. But these are just terrific numbers. And what would your ask be of our members?
Absolutely. So, we have a long and growing, constantly growing list of supporters and endorsers from across the state. We are always inviting, especially elected officials, to join us in supporting this measure. Additionally, school districts and local governments have been passing resolutions in support of the Schools and Communities First initiative as well. So we would invite every member to join us in endorsing this measure and getting involved with the other elected officials in our county that are working in support of this, as well as to pass initiatives. And I would also encourage all of these numbers and the numbers for the special districts, et cetera. We have reports and things like that that we can share with people as well, and I'm happy to do that.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. I have endorsed this initiative and hope that the Cities Association and its member cities would consider doing the same. Thank you so much for your time today, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.